You're listening to the new media. You're listening to Mitchell Talks. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at Mitchell Talks.
Hi, Brianna Bailey. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing good.
For people who are a regular Brianna Bailey reader in the Oklahoman, now you're at Frontier. How are you liking it?
I love it. I have a lot of freedom to do what I want. I work from home. The Frontier, it's a nonprofit that was started by Robert Lorton, the former publisher of the Tulsa World, and we have a staff of 4 people. There's 3 in Tulsa, and then there's me. So it's really exciting getting to do new things. It's really freeing to get away from the daily deadlines of a newspaper, and I love it.
What sort of tools do you use to telecommute in journalism?
I have to, I just like text back and forth with my boss. And in Tulsa, we're just constantly like texting each other, Twitter, Facebook, just my phone, basically. Do
you write your stories? This is really nerd stuff, okay?
That's all right.
Do you write your stories in Word, or do you have other applications that you use to write with them?
I use Google Docs, and that's been a recent transition for me, but it's great because it's all kind of exists in the cloud, so I can take notes with it on my phone, and then it's also on my computer. I can access it from wherever. I can share stuff with, the staff in Tulsa, and it works really well, and it's free. So
typically, when you were doing daily stories, you had to turn around pretty fast, didn't you?
Yes.
So at the Frontier, you're able to take, how much time can you take on a story?
Well, I still write daily stories from time to time. One of the reasons that the Frontier hired me was because they're based in Tulsa, and they wanted to have somebody down here to go cover meetings out at the Capitol or a press conference at the Capitol if they needed to. And that's worked out really well. So occasionally I'll still have a daily story. But there's other stories that I work weeks on.
Your beat at Frontier, is it going to be somewhat like what you did at the Oklahoman? Are you expanding? You did health, you did a lot of business work. Kind of what are you wanting to do as a beat at Frontier? So
a lot of freedom, like I said, maybe too much. but I'm kind of all over the place. I'm writing about criminal justice. I and my colleague Cliff Adcock, we just finished a story about looking at the Department of Corrections halfway house that was shut down in December in Oklahoma City, and we spent about a month looking into that and some of the security problems there that led to sexual assault happening there. One inmate allegedly murdering one of his fellow inmates and a civilian during a time when they ran away from the facility. And so a lot of things related to criminal justice. I'm very interested in that. State government, of course. I really want to spend more time looking at business stories and the energy industry in particular, because I just don't think there's enough coverage of that in this state. There's such a huge force in Oklahoma, political force, business force, economic force, and I don't think a lot of the local media has the resources to cover it as well as it deserves to be covered in Oklahoma.
If you cover corrections and you cover state government, that would probably make you a NASCAR fan who likes you wait for the wrecks, right? I mean,
yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about energy. I did my weekend. We're taping on a Friday at Camps, and I just did the kind of Senator Griffin's farewell. She's announced she's not going to run, and one of the stories she was talking about this week was this battle between oil and gas over these caps. And I saw where she and Senator David and Senator Thompson and others are saying, no, we're going to get sued. And it's making Oklahoma like a laughing stock to investors around the country. We can't keep our word. We saw some folks up in Enid recently, and the folks up in Pryor that deal with Google saying the very same thing. Our business reputation's just trash right now. When you look at this at your level, the 10,000 foot level, and you see what's going on, what are your thoughts in terms of perhaps maybe, because you mentioned there's not a lot of folks writing stories right now, what should we be most concerned about?
Well, I mean, just from, and I covered the energy industry for a number of years as a business reporter, first at the Journal Record and then the Oklahoman. But what I see is, Oklahoma has really tried to brand itself as sort of a pro-business state, a business that is friendly to, a place that is friendly to big business, that you would want to relocate your business here, hire people here. And in Oklahoma's rush to do that, we sort of forgot the importance of education and infrastructure. And these are all things that, business looks at as well and needs. They need an educated workforce. They need roads and infrastructure. And in our rush to make Oklahoma so business friendly, I think the state kind of forgot about some of those things.
The battle between oil and wind, and I don't think most people understand that wind is, they're enormous purchasers of gas, that those wind guys are punching holes in the ground going for gas. Mm-hmm. How badly do you think Oklahomans are informed about that battle and what the stakes are at that? Because I don't see that in other states.
I think that the energy has a lot of point about the incentives that the wind industry gets. The wind industry gets a lot of subsidies from the state, and at the federal level they've gotten a lot of tax breaks, and it's been that way for years. And the wind industry is not a big employer. They don't generate a lot of jobs. They have, there's construction when they build their wind turbines, and there's some maintenance involved. Like they have wind technicians that climb the towers to make repairs and things like that. Maybe like, a handful of people that a wind farm employs, but a wind farm pretty much runs on its own. And yeah, they're not a big generator of employment. And so, and the ownership is all out of state. These aren't Oklahoma companies. But also, in a way, I think the oil industry has kind of used this as a diversionary technique. They're saying, well, look at this over here. You're not looking at these subsidies that you're giving to the wind companies. Don't look at us. Look at the wind companies. They're the bad ones. They're taking all the tax breaks and stuff from the state. When that's, I don't think it's a fair comparison necessarily.
And speaking of that industry, you got a lot of tongues wagging earlier this week whenever your story came out about Texas and the oil industry, specifically Continental. Tell us about how you came to do that story and what the significance of that story is.
So I really wanted to look at what public companies, some of the state's biggest companies, pay in income taxes. And it's just kind of an overlooked subject, and it's something that I started thinking about just because I had been a business reporter for so long, and it's something that not a whole lot of people think about or look at. I think most people just assume that big corporations that are based in their state are paying income taxes. I mean, we all pay income taxes. Most businesses pay income taxes. You would think that these corporations do also. And in Oklahoma, corporations pay 6%. It's a flat rate across the board. But what I looked at, I found out that some of the state's largest corporations, most of them being oil and gas, because that's what Oklahoma does, we do oil and gas, aren't paying anything. And they likely won't for many, many years. And a lot of this has to do with the oil bust of a few years ago, when oil went from over $100 a barrel to, I think, like $30 or something like that. And the oil and gas companies in the state took big losses for a couple years. They laid people off. They lost billions of dollars. And that creates a tax write-off for them. It's a deduction. It's called a net operating loss carry forward. And it's a basic bedrock part of accounting, tax accounting. It's nothing controversial. It's just how income taxes work, basically. That if a business loses money, if a corporation loses money one year, they can carry forward that loss to the next year and make it a tax deduction. And they can do this for up to 20 years. And that's the way it works in most states. Oklahoma isn't doing anything unusual or giving these companies big breaks on their taxes. This is just how income taxes work. And so I just started looking at that, and I found out that Continental Resources has over $2 billion of these tax deductions, so they can use for up to 20 years. So they likely won't be paying income taxes in Oklahoma for many, 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 many years because they had a couple bad years.
And that doesn't mean they're doing anything wrong.
No, they're not breaking the law. They're just following the tax laws in the state.
But for the Oklahoma public right now, with what's going on up the street at 23rd and Lincoln, dealing with teacher salaries, the optics are bad.
Right. I just kind of wanted it to be part of the conversation because I hadn't seen that be part of the conversation yet. So I thought it was relevant because of where we are right now.
And you've seen the battle between, speaking of wind and oil, the battle over GPT. I've seen so much information from both sides. It's hard for average Oklahomans to decide who's telling the truth or who's not telling all of the truth. It really is out in the weeds. You just did a story really about the tax code, and that's not what a lot of people are concerned about. They just look at how much we pay in teachers. How do we decipher these huge industries about who's shooting straight with us?
I don't know. Everyone has an agenda. You just look at who benefits, I think the oil and gas industry, they feel like they just want other industries to pay they say, well, we want everyone to pay their fair share. And we feel like we've been unfairly targeted because we're this big industry in the state. And to an extent they have a point, but they are paying very low GPT rates. If you compare Oklahoma to other states, what the rates are in other states, Oklahoma has very low GPT. And looking at doing the story on income taxes, I was looking at companies' financial statements, listening to their quarterly earnings calls and stuff, and this isn't. GPT is not something that these companies spend a lot of time talking about or worrying about. It's not really, it doesn't really come up a lot, and I don't think it's how they make business decisions. I think they drill where the oil is.
It's an interesting point you just made. People have not taken into account the factors you did in your story. All of the discussions tend to be very high level, real superficial, all about GPT, with very little analysis outside of that aspect of the story.
Right.
Now, you're aware of what's happening up the street. I think the Oklahoma Education Association had a press conference. We haven't had a chance to look at what they said today, but you see what we're on the verge of experiencing here in Oklahoma, where some of the worst teacher salaries in the nation. I had dinner with in fact, my son, my youngest son, who is about to be a senior at Luther High School, has a great English teacher, Rhonda Halevity. They call her Doc Halevity. She's a doctor, PhD. If she were living in Denver, she would double her salary and work 4 days a week. Colorado's going to that, which may be the next discussion, by the way, Brianna, which is the 4-day weeks. They're pejorative here. Mm-hmm. In some states, they're making it a benefit. So we'll see how we readjust our outlook on that. But we know what's happening. The discussion is mostly about how we pay for it. Very few people, even the people that vote red all the time out there, are not saying we don't need to pay teachers. As you watch this unfold, journalism hasn't dealt with this story in 27 years. There's a lot of people in these newsrooms around town who weren't even born when the 1017 battle happened. How do you prepare journalists, and which, oh, by the way, it's much different than it was 27 years ago. The Tulsa World, the Oklahoman, and 4 TV stations ruling the roost. Now, dozens of online publications, which I read every day. I get my feed from Twitter, I get my feed from Facebook, other places. How well do you think journalism as a whole in Oklahoma is prepared to cover this story adequately?
I don't think there can ever be enough reporters. The staff at our local newspapers has shrunk quite a bit from 27 years ago, and not just, the Tulsa World, the Oklahoman. I'm talking about the community newspapers, the small town newspapers. Their staffs have really been diminished, which is the sad thing. They may not even have like a full-time education reporter. A paper in Southeast Oklahoma is probably, they're not going to have an education reporter. They're going to have maybe somebody who's covering city council and the courts, and maybe also covering education on top of that. So I feel for those communities, because I think that if we have a teacher strike, there's going to be a lot of untold stories there in rural Oklahoma.
People that you respect and read, I'll share some of mine. I mean, obviously, I'm an enormous Steve Lackmeyer fan. I'm an enormous Dave Cathy fan. Ben Felder. Andrea Yeager out of Tulsa, Tulsa World. Some of these reporters, which I follow them because I want to see what they're saying. What are some of the journalists that have made you what you are today, some of the ones that you admire, and maybe that are no longer journalists, but that were helped in formulating how you report?
You mentioned Steve Lackmeyer. He was kind of an early mentor of mine, and I really learned a lot from him. At first, when I worked at the Journal Record, he was my competitor at the Oklahoma, and I don't know if you can even call what I was doing competing with him, but I really learned a lot from watching how he worked, and watching how important it was to him to get the story right. So yeah, he was definitely an early mentor of mine. Ziva Brandstetter, who founded the Frontier, she's no longer there. After she was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, she went and now she works for the Center for Investigative Reporting out in California. She's still a board member at the Frontier, and I talk to her from time to time, and she's a huge inspiration because she knows so much about public records and how to get them, and she's a real advocate for open records and things like that, and just a really great resource to us still.
Look into your crystal ball for the next few months. You had mentioned you want to start doing some healthcare writing. You still do business writing. What do you think is going to be on your plate as we look forward, especially the rest of this legislative session, which is where people have clocks right now. Mm-hmm. Trey Savage over at Nondoc has a countdown to the walkout. So what do you see short-term, long-term for you?
So one of the things that I try to do is there's important stories going on that I might not necessarily cover because there's other people covering it. And so what I try to do is I try to look where other people aren't necessarily looking. I try to find things that no one else is covering, because the Frontier isn't going to go cover a city council meeting. The Oklahoman does that, and they do it well. So I don't really need to cover a city council meeting, or like sort of the day-to-day grind at the legislature. There's a press corps. There's 10 people up there that are covering that every day. So I don't need to be out there. I follow it, and it's important work that they're doing up there, but it's not really what I do. So I'm going to be trying to look for some stories about education and the energy industry and healthcare, and how some of the state's policy decisions have affected those things. I'm trying to look for stories that show where the state is going. Sometimes the decisions that are made at the Capitol affect people in unintended ways, in ways that the people who wrote the laws never could have foreseen. And so those are kind of the things that I'm going to be looking for.
In June, we have primary elections, and we have medical marijuana on the ballot.
Yes.
Anytime that I'm looking at social media and the word medical marijuana comes across, you cannot believe how many people jump on these Facebook Live events I'm doing. We could be doing one about a new tire at Daytona. There would be somebody wanting to talk about medical marijuana. It is captivating people's imagination, and there are a lot of people that are going to be for this. The Antis have announced a group, and I'll be talking with them pretty soon. But do you think that's going to be something you might be following since you're interested in the health issues?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've been kind of watching that for a long time, and it's really interesting how it kind of played out with that, because there's been several bills and stuff the legislature that proposed over the past 10 years that would have authorized medical marijuana, but none of those passed. I don't think any of them ever even got a committee hearing. But this is something that kind of it's sort of like the teachers' strike. The people kind of took it into their own hands with the initiative petition, and the thing with that is they got to write the language, because the state lawmakers did not go in on this medical marijuana thing. Now the people wrote it, and I think there's a lot of concern with the language of that ballot measure, because it allows for medical marijuana to be prescribed for any condition. And from what I understand, it's going to be the most broad medical marijuana law in the United States if it's passed.
And the no's will be taking advantage of that, or trying to drill down into that one.
Yeah, so basically the same thing is kind of happening with the kind of teachers' revolt that we're seeing, because the legislature failed to approve this $5,000 raise for teachers. Now the teachers are saying, no, we want $10,000. It's the people took it in their own hands, and now the legislature is out of control of that. The lawmakers aren't getting to write the laws. And I think they're scared about that. I mean, you see several attempts at the legislature right now to kind of write some legislation that would rein in this medical marijuana proposal and stuff. And I think a lot of people are scared about what might happen if it passes, rightly or wrongly.
Give us an idea of what's in your Twitter feed, your Facebook feed, that Oklahomans should be reading outside of the state. I mean, people that write or broadcast outside of the state that we're like, oh, I should have followed that. Sometimes I do from the morning shows. I'll see somebody that I've never heard before, and I listen to them, so then I go look them up on Twitter and start to follow them. Anything in particular you can think of that we could go follow or read and go, wow?
Let me see. I'm trying to think of who I follow that's really amazing on Twitter. I follow Matt Pierce from the LA Times. He's a national reporter, and he covers a lot of things that are related to the Midwest and Oklahoma. I think he's a really great reporter, really great follow. Let me see, who else? Chris McDaniel at BuzzFeed. He covers the death penalty, and with all of the interesting developments with Oklahoma's death penalty, the state just recently announced it's going to be the first in the country to move to executions with nitrogen hypoxia. He's a really great follow. Yeah.
How are we doing on justice reform? in your opinion?
Oh, I think we're failing. I think we're failing miserably as a state. You know, the state's prisons are, I think, at 113% capacity. We're on track to beat Louisiana as the highest incarcerating state in the nation. You know, we throw people in prison. We throw away the keys. Here, you know, you have people that are still in prison in Oklahoma that are serving life without parole for drugs. I mean, that's frightening. I don't think I don't think we're doing society any favors by doing that.
How do people follow Brianna Bailey?
You can follow me on Twitter at BriOKC. It's BRIOKC. And then our website is readfrontier.org.
Well, it's great to finally get to talk to you. I've watched your work from afar for a long time, and not incidentally, I've had people like, say, for instance, hint, Steve Lackmeyer, who says to me, this woman is doing really, really great work. And so we've seen the stories, and every time you write a story, people are like, well, sit up and take notice about it. So it's really great to get to know you, and it's great to talk to you, and hope you'll come back again to do another Mitchell Talks podcast. We do them right here at camps, and always wish you the best of luck. I'm really, really looking forward to the next story. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
You're listening to the new media, the Mitchell Talks Network. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at Mitchell Talks.